Hello and welcome to Cyfarthfa Park and Cyfarthfa Castle behind me, and you joining me. My name's Parry. I work at Cyfarthfa Castle and we are going to be going through a different type of video today. We're going to be looking at myth busting. I've worked in the museum now for coming nearly 14 years now, and since that time I've heard countless rumours about Merthyr's history, specifically obviously working in Cyfarthfa, about Cyfarthfa Castle and about the Crawshay family themselves. So we're going to look at a number of different ones that we have heard the most, and I should say everyone I mentioned to you I've heard well into double figures. Let's have a look at if any of these are true or not. A nice quick and easy one, which I'm not counting in the whole of the myth. While I'm here, the Crawshays were not Satanists like many people tell me. These were taken from the Goat Mill Road entrance, which was in Dowlas, a steel and iron rolling mill, and these marked the entrance way, okay? So they nothing to do with the castle. They came here in the 20th century and were added just to save and rescue them, basically. So yeah, without further ado anyway, we'll get on to the proper myths and legends now. Let's go. The first myth we're going to tackle proper is a myth that appears in many places. In heritage leaflets, on Wales Online, in many places it states the Cyfarthfa Castle has 365 windows. Some people go even further, saying 52 rooms. So they say 365 windows, one for every day of the year, and 52 rooms. First off, the problem with this myth is that it doesn't specify what date that we are talking about, because obviously the castle behind me has gone through many different iterations. So were the 365 windows there when it was completed in 1825, or were they there when extensions were added in the 1860s and 70s, or were they there when even further extensions and massive floors were added when the school building was added in 1910 to 1913? I have no idea what historical period they're referring to. What I do know is that the rooms, for instance, there were far more than 52 rooms in every iteration of the castle. The 365 windows one is a more difficult one to pin down. What are we going by exactly though? Are we going by the pane of window, or are we going by the window structure itself? I think there's only one way of really finding out for definite, and that's counting them. So that's what I'm going to get to it. 130, 131, 132, 133, 136. 260, 270. I don't think I'm going to get through this. So I couldn't physically count all the panes of glass. It was a nightmare. So I decided to just count the window, the aperture itself. And I discounted any parts of the building that were added very recently to the back and other parts like that. So I went round and counted all the windows, and I can safely say that there is just over 170 windows in the building, and that's now. That's right now when the building was extended for the school and lots of other bits were taken away and more windows added, to be honest, like the school hall and various other parts were added, and added extra windows to places that they didn't exist before. There are literally thousands of panes of glass, which I can't get through counting, but in terms of strict windows, just over 170, which means that the myth that there are 365 windows in Cyfarthfa Castle, one for every day of the year, is sadly still a myth. So this myth is actually one that's taught in classrooms around Merthyr. We've heard teachers come into the museum and talk about it endlessly, and it's all to do with that clock behind me, the Pandy Farm clock. Now the myth is that Mr. Crawshay was so horrible that he only built 3 faces on this clock, because he specifically didn't want to build a 4th, because he didn't want his workers to know the time. Now this myth is a bit of a crazy one, because it makes no sense whatsoever. As you can see behind me, the only part that doesn't have a clock face on it is the part that's facing the park where I'm sitting right now. You could literally see the time at any part of the ironworks possible. So this myth must have stemmed from one or two things, I think. It must either be referring to the people that work in this park. Obviously the ironworks weren't in this park, So the only people not having the time would be the people, the gate groundskeepers working within the park. So that's a possibility. The other possibility may be household workers in the house, but of course there'd be lots of clocks around the household. That clock was built so you could see the time from all around the ironworks. So the vast majority of workers at Cyfarthfa could actually tell when it's clocking in time and clocking out time. On to the next myth. So we're at Merthyr churchyard at the moment, and behind me is the grave of Robert Thompson Crawshay. Now this grave has caused a great deal of controversy over the years. There's a multitude of myths with this, because in the museum we get tons and tons of people coming in. Some of them say he's buried under this gigantic stone slab upside down because everyone wanted to face him in the direction of hell. Other rumours that we've heard is he's buried with all his wealth under there. Another rumour we've heard is the stone slab was actually placed there not by the family but by the workers to keep Robert Thompson Crawshay under there. First, the gravestone itself and the gravesite itself. Every single thing you see was directly and expressly put into place by Robert Thompson Crawshay himself. Obviously, and there's no truth really to anyone having any say of his burial. But then we come to the God forgive me. Because a lot of people think the God forgive me is his way of apologising for some wrongs that he did in life to the workforce. But it couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, we have no idea exactly what the God forgive me means, but we can be 100% certain that it wasn't him in some way apologising to his workforce. Because even in the years and the months leading up to his death, he made many public speeches about how the unions in Cyfarthfa had destroyed Cyfarthfa, and he had done all he can to rejuvenate it and keep it going. But his old boys, the boys that he trusted in the workforce, had gone, and now these new union boys can't be trusted. Even right before he died, he believed every decision he made for Cyfarthfa was correct. So for him to then suddenly pass away and then put God forgive me as an apology makes no sense whatsoever. Other people say God forgive me is to do with him apologising in some way to a wrong he'd done to his family, his daughter primarily, where there was a lot of issues with her being cut out of the Crawshay family will because of marrying against her father's will and all that type of thing. But again, a lot of this makes little to no sense at all. What does make sense is that God forgive me is quite a generic epitaph for a gravestone, and for a God-fearing man like Robert Thompson Crawshay was, and like the Crawshay family were, it makes sense for them to put this on the gravestone. We'll never fully know what Robert Thompson meant by using this epitaph, only he will. But there was an argument via letter between his sons after his death, just before this gravestone was put in place. And the argument was all about whether they should carry out their father's wishes and put God forgive me on the stone. One son believed it would cast rumours and people would be debating what it meant, and the other son was adamant that they carried out their father's wishes nevertheless. And that is exactly what happened. They carried their father's wishes out, and the other brother was proved right in terms of debate going on down the decades as to what he means by God forgive me. But only he will know, and so if anyone tells you any different, then they don't really know for definite at all. So hopefully that put to bed a lot of that myth for now anyway. So the next myth is one that I've again heard plenty of times really, and the myth is there's an escape tunnel from Cyfarthfa Castle under the ground and all the way. I've heard it have many different locations though. Some people have come into the museum before and told me that it's ended up in the Mawless Tavern. Some people have said that it goes over to Gweldigar. It comes out everywhere. But is there any truth to this myth? Is there an escape tunnel underneath Cyfarthfa? No, unfortunately not. There is definitely a tunnel. The tunnel is a culvert. It's a water overflow tunnel that goes from the basement in the museum all the way down under the lake and then down to the River Taff. Now there are some people who have been through this culvert, nutters I like to call them, because it's not the most pleasant place to wade through, to be honest. But ultimately there is no escape tunnel whatsoever. There is one tunnel underneath Cyfarthfa, but it is definitely a culvert clearly marked on loads of different maps and not in any way, shape or form an escape tunnel. So we can move on from that myth now. So I know what you're thinking, he's wearing some different clothes now, but true to form, Merthyr's weather didn't treat me well and it started to rain after the last myth we tackled. So I'm on a different day totally now, but we're up by the Kevin Coyd viaduct. And this is the place of our next myth. And this is one that I'll concede right from the get-go that I can't prove or disprove in any way, unfortunately. But there are a few things pointing towards it being possibly true, definitely. Now the myth is that this viaduct, the third largest viaduct in Wales, built in 1866, which connected Merthyr and Brecon railways, really opening up this tourist route and this industrial kind of trade route as well. But the myth is that the distinctive curve of the viaduct was only there to avoid Crawshay owned land. Now, trying to prove or disprove this myth is quite problematic because I haven't been able to find anything that said outright the design of the bridge was curved specifically because the Crawshays said it has to be to avoid their land. The bridge was many years in the making. They obviously had to buy and purchase land for stretches way beyond this area because they were building a railway. And there was many issues with buying and purchasing land and running the railway through the Cyfarthfa owned lands, the lands owned by the Crawshay family. Every document and every article and every complaint I could find is not specifically about the crossing of the River Ure. It's about the Cyfarthfa site itself and the rail running through the Cyfarthfa site, which is further down from where we are, and then up to this viaduct. And so Robert Thompson Crawshay did delay the building of this bridge and this railway by quite a way because they couldn't agree on the rail passing through the works on any way, shape and form for many years. But then by the time that the bridge was started construction, there was an agreement, and the Crawshays and the Cyfarthfa Ironworks overall were happy with the agreements in place. But the problem is, yet again, is that the curve, there's nothing that I could find that specifically says the curve is definitely there to appease the Crawshays. So this one is kind of still up in the air. It's not broken or busted, and I haven't been able to prove it either way. But either way, the curve and the bridge itself is still one of those unique stories that get passed down to Merthyr, and we get people in the museum all the time telling us about this curve in the bridge that was built to avoid Crawshay land. This final myth is all about how workers were paid. And the myth is, as we often hear on the front desk of the museum, the Crawshay, Mr. Crawshay, paid his workers in tokens rather than in cash. Now this token system of paying is called the truck shop token system of paying. So first off, the truck shop token system essentially pays workers in a token that's not a legal tender that you can only spend in specific shops. And those shops are normally owned by the iron company or the colliery, whoever is your boss. It was an incredibly hated system because it took away the choice to shop around from workers. When you're talking about Merthyr, though, Merthyr is one of these places that totally got rid of the system quite early on. Take, for example, midway through the 19th century, an article in the Merthyr Telegraph states that we need not say much on this subject to those who are acquainted with Merthyr, where happily track does not exist. And that was true for the most part, because track was hated. Now it was adopted by Dowlas Ironworks and by Pendarren, notably Pendarren Ironworks track shop got ransacked during a riot in 1800. But as you can imagine, if you've got rioters destroying shops and general unrest by these things, then you kind of get rid of the system quite early on. But there was one ironworks in Merthyr that never operated the truck shop token system, and that was Cyfarthfa Ironworks. And they didn't operate it because the Crawshays were against paying their workers in that way. They could see how that was unfair and how it was perceived by the workers, and they didn't want to put that in place at Cyfarthfa at all. If we look at William Crawshay, the longest serving of all the ironmasters at Cyfarthfa, he had this to say on the truck shop token system. The motto of my family has been and is live and let live, and as long as I live, no truck system shall ever be tolerated, and should any of my sons encourage such things, they will be doing so in diametrical opposition to my views. So I hope that puts the myth to bed, at least when it comes to Cyfarthfa. Truck shop tokens and paying your workers in tokens wasn't really a thing. And that brings us to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed looking at certain myths with me, and I hope you maybe have learned some things, because I certainly have, because looking into a few of these myths, like for instance the curve in the viaduct, I thought there was no truth in that, but it seems like there's more truth than I give credit for in that one, and a few other little bits here and there. But hopefully you've enjoyed hearing about these myths, and certainly in the comments below and wherever you find this video, talk to us and let us know what stories have been handed down to you about Cyfarthfa and the Crawshays, and we can talk about whether they are true or not in the comments below as well. So thank you very much for watching. Share this video if you like it, and hwyl fawr.